Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. We are going to get started with the first forum of 2025. We're planning a lot of special things for 2026 for year 50, but for now, we're going to kick off 2025. I'm Doug Buchanan. I am editor-in-chief of Columbus Business First. I'm also a member of the Columbus Metropolitan Club Board of Trustees. What I am not is related to Bill LaFayette, even though it may appear so, but not at all. We want to thank today's forum sponsors, Frost Brown Todd, the Columbus region, Ian Alexander Photography, PNC, and Smoot Construction. How about a hand for our today's main sponsors? We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, our live stream and marketing partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and our host, View Columbus. Every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's program. Okay, welcome to the annual Blue Chip Economic Forecast. Today marks the 26th annual release of the Regionomics Columbus Economic Forecast and the 24th year in a row that CMC has hosted this great annual tradition. To introduce today's panelist, please welcome Mary Ock with today's sponsor, PNC. Mary, the podium is yours.
Hopefully that works. It's always nice when someone adjusts the microphone for you. Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with you. Thank you for being here in person, and thanks to those watching us on live stream. On behalf of our PNC employees across here in Central Ohio, many of whom are here in the audience, we wish you a happy and prosperous 2025. And we're happy to welcome you to the annual Blue Chip Economic Forecast. We're excited to be a sponsor of today's event as part of our commitment to investing in and supporting the communities where we live and work. This means that our corporate and business bankers are here, locally, spread across Central Ohio, addressing your requests and business needs. Today will serve as a great guide to what to watch for as the Fed works to continue to tamp down inflation and prepare for a new administration in Washington. Here at home, we think you'll see that 2025 may well be a pivotal year across Central Ohio. Today's panelists will share their expertise and provide insights about our community and its standing as a booming Midwest city. What measures are being taken to ensure there are enough residents for each vacant job? What developments will attract even more people? And then, of course, there's the housing issue. The Fed policy decisions this year will impact the housing markets, but how we know they'll be impacted is yet to be seen. Are there enough homes to support our population growth? The consensus has been that we're underbuilding homes, especially affordable ones. And then there's also that lingering question that just about everyone here in the room wants to know: how could a Buckeye offense only put up 10 points against that team up north, but is now just 2 games away from winning the national championship? Can we do it? Don't expect you to comment on that, but if you'd like to. Now, no one has a crystal ball, especially regarding that last question, but today's forum should provide insights into from our local experts as to what we should expect in 2025 and beyond. So now, without further ado, please help me welcome today's distinguished panel. Dr. Joyce Chen, Professor of Economics and Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at The Ohio State University. Kathy Bostjancic, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist for Nationwide Mutual. Dr. Bill LaFayette, owner of Regionomics. And our host, Benjamin Lanka, business editor for the Columbus Dispatch. So to kick us off, as we do each year, I will invite Dr. Bill LaFayette to the podium for the 26th annual official release of his Regionomics Columbus Economic Forecast. Bill, as always, we're hoping for good news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Okay. Thank you all for being here. And for those of you streaming now or later, thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks to our sponsors, and as always, a big thanks to my friends at CMC for making this forecast the first forum of the year for all these years. So in the 26 years that I've been doing these forecasts, there have been cheerful ones and not so cheerful ones. I'm afraid this is a not so cheerful one. This year's forecast is for a gain of a measly 4,500 jobs in our 1.1 million plus economy, 0.4%. That's actually only a touch less than the 5,200 jobs that it looks like we got last year. I only wish that we'd come closer to my 2024 forecast. This time last year, I was predicting a gain of 9,800 or 0.9%. Oops. 2025 is likely to be the fourth consecutive year with a growth rate much less than the national average. It looks like U.S. employment grew 1.6% last year, down from 2.3% in 2023. The economic forecasts are calling for about 1% this year. The problem seems not to be underlying economic problems for the most part, and we'll talk about one problem. The problem the past few years has been weak growth in our labor force. That's not quite the problem now that it was a couple years ago. Last year, labor force increased 1.5%, up from the 1% the year before. Population growth picked up from its pandemic doldrums too. The problem now seems to be a disparity between the skills that employers need and those that job applicants are offering. What makes me think so? For one thing, the difference between the growth in the labor force and the growth in employment. The unemployment rate through last November averaged 4%, up from 3.1% over the same months in 2023. People are coming into the labor force, but they're not getting hired. The folks actively looking for work are up 30% from last year. Another clue is in the online want ads. These have been increasing rapidly for much of the year. Total job postings in Central Ohio in late October and early November were 21% higher than they were during this time or that time in 2023. Employers are putting out postings for jobs that can't get filled. This understaffing means inefficiency and reduced profitability. The problem is somewhat spotty. Many sectors are weaker than average, but construction and healthcare are doing well, although who knows how much better they would be doing without a skill shortage. There is, as I hinted earlier, one key industry that's a big worry apart from the labor force problem, and that's insurance. The Central Ohio trend since 2018's been straight down. Sorry, Kathy. Unlike that elsewhere. We've lost more than 10,000 insurance jobs in Central Ohio, 25% in 6 years. I don't have a really clear reason for that because individual employers' employment is confidential. I know that the declines are hitting both carriers and agencies. Nationally, carrier employment's been flat and agency employment's increased. I do have a written version of the forecast. There are problems with my website, so it's not yet posted there. It will be posted, though, to the CMC website, and it should be on my website www.regionomicsllc.com before too long, God willing. If you've been to these forums before, you know that I always like to take some time to reflect on an issue that's on my mind and has bearing on our region's economic progress. This year, I want to highlight the results of a study that I did last fall for the Columbus Urban League. The point was to compare economic inclusion in Central Ohio to that in the 53 other very large metros in the U.S. The question is this: how does our economic growth and prosperity compare to other big metros? And how well are the benefits of growth distributed across our population? Looking at economic growth over the past 10 years, we rank in the middle in growth of jobs and production of goods and services. Prosperity, which is the growth of income and wealth resulting from increases in jobs and productivity, again, we rank in the middle. Inclusion is how well these economic and prosperity gains are distributed among the residents of our region. There are two ways to look at this: distribution across neighborhoods and distribution among racial and ethnic populations. We actually do pretty well in distribution of growth and prosperity across neighborhoods. We rank 14th out of 54. That means that although we certainly have economically challenged neighborhoods, we don't have as many of the deeply impoverished neighborhoods that other big regions have. The problem lies in the availability of our region's economic benefits to people of color. This includes employment and earnings gains and poverty rates of people of color versus those of non-Hispanic whites. Here we rank dead last, 54th out of 54. The problem weighs heavily on our economy in a number of different ways, so addressing it would be really beneficial. I ran a little experiment and found that if we improved from worst to first, there could be 42,000 fewer people in or near poverty 10 years from now, and 154,000 more jobs 10 years from now compared to what we would get if we did nothing. Those results rely on a barrel full of assumptions, so we shouldn't take the numbers themselves seriously. The point is simply that the benefits would be really, really big. So how do we get from here to there? We obviously need to start by recognizing the problem, and I hope you'll agree that we've at least done that. Given that, we need to get together and develop a bold goal for improvement. The first and easiest step is simply to ensure that low-income households are collecting all the federal and state benefits to which they're entitled. More dollars coming into the region would increase consumption, along with all the indirect economic activity that creates. We should prioritize effective occupational needs analysis and career counseling, and that should target the biggest of those needs. All the baby boom retirements currently underway are creating lots of openings, and that's a big reason for our workforce problem. Many key jobs require only a high school diploma with possibly some additional short-term training. I did a project back in 2023 identifying jobs on the south side of Columbus that are crucial for industries in that area, require only a high school diploma, and pay reasonably well, certainly better than restaurant and retail jobs. We could expand that kind of analysis to the region as a whole. That idea leads to the need to improve K-12 education and reduce the number of dropouts. Jobs not requiring a diploma are low-paying, few, and decreasing. So we need to make sure that students are learning the skills that employers need them to have. This includes both technical skills and what I call work-ready skills, such as effective communication, creative thinking, teamwork, leadership, punctuality, responsibility. Educators should be in regular communication with business leaders to understand their needs and incorporate those needs into school curricula. We need to do a better job supporting the connection of people to training and jobs. Lanka is a big step, but we need other wraparound services such as childcare and addressing other barriers to employment. That's equally important. Another priority for advancing economic inclusion is a point that I've made many times before: the importance of entrepreneurship and small business development. That increases individuals' earning potential and benefits the broader local economy. We ought to look at the regions where economic inclusion is better than it is here. We don't have to look that far. What are those regions doing that we aren't? What aren't they doing that we are? Ultimately, improving economic inclusion ought to be a community-wide effort. I urge us to create a task force whose mission will be to improve economic inclusion in Central Ohio, to move us from worst to first. If we can succeed at this, it's going to reduce the exclusion of our neighbors from the benefits of our growth. It's also going to improve that growth community-wide. It's also going to be a big help in addressing our workforce shortages and skills mismatches. Again, a very happy 2025 to you all, notwithstanding. Thanks a lot for listening. Ben, take it away.
Well, with that report, the holidays are true and well over, I guess, Bill, right? Thanks for that. Afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I did just want to have one shout out to Mark Williams, former dispatch reporter who moderated many of these before me. He is now retired and enjoying that, but he's here today. Mark, they've decided to finally upgrade to a newer, younger model to moderate these events. And to make anyone Gen X or older feel really old, just so you know, fun fact for today, Wham's Wake Me Up Before You Go Go was released closer to the end of World War II than to today. So there you go. But as we get started, given Bill's uplifting discussion, Kathy and Joyce, would you like to add anything that we can actually be hopeful for looking into 25? Anything for the economy, from interest rates to inflation?
Well, I'm happy to start, Ben, but after that comment about Wham and putting time in perspective, I don't know, I'm feeling a little downbeat now. But no, in reality, we look for a solid economic activity on a national level, but moderating. And I think that is in line with Bill's comments, in that we're coming off of several years of really robust economic activity. Even if you exclude the very dramatic rebound after COVID with the shutdowns, the last 2 years, economic growth was closer to 3% than 2%. So it stands to reason that you're going to see some moderation, but we don't see a collapse in economic activity. We don't see a big rise in unemployment rate. We think it'll be moderate, kind of in line with what Bill talked about, maybe going up to as high as 4.5%, but historically that's still quite low. In terms of employment, again, would also agree that we're looking for some moderation in employment growth. But it's strong enough to keep income gains moving forward at a pretty healthy pace, and that will continue to fund consumer spending. And it is the consumer at the end of the day that is still the main locomotive of the U.S. economy. So some moderation, but far from it really being a disaster, so to speak. I think in terms of, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we go through the discussion, but there is a wide band of uncertainty around that forecast because we have a new, new administration coming in with Donald Trump and with the Republicans controlling Congress. There is, of course, a prospective likelihood that we're going to get some form of tariff increases, some restraint on immigration, but also deregulation. So if you think about how that all plays out for the economy, there's some good and possibly some negative headwinds there. But the uncertainty is we don't know what those policies are going to be yet, right? We don't know how large tariffs will be, even what products, which countries. It's uncertain at this point. And we also don't know what actually plays out with immigration. Are there large-scale deportations, or is it just limiting immigration that's coming in now? And Bill talked about labor supply. The immigration, whether it was done in a very good manner or not, the bottom line is at a national level, it added to labor supply. May not have been the high-skilled workers that we still need, but that added to labor supply. So how does that all play out? The one thing I would say, though, too, even if we get a little less employment growth, what we have seen is productivity growth pick up very nicely over the last few years. So that's the silver lining. Now, the question is, can that be maintained? Because we could still have a very strong economy, and we all individually as workers could benefit in our companies if we continue to have very healthy productivity growth. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks. I'm optimistic with what Bill started with, right? That I think our economy has really good bones, right? I think all the fundamentals are in place, and I think our local officials and governments have taken a lot of steps in the right direction to make sure we're on a path for sustainable growth and development. What I hope we take from some of the other insights today actually is that now is the time for us to really focus on the human capital that's embedded in our economy, right? A lot of this is about what's happening to workers, what are they able to do, where are they able to go, what skills do they have, right? And especially given some of what's transpired with or the projected policies of the Trump administration and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, right? I think we need to look more closely at that middle of our economy and make sure it doesn't get hollowed out in this process, and that's what's really going to help us move towards strong growth in the region.
Thanks. I know you touched on it, but one of the biggest changes we'll see is President Trump returning to the White House. During his campaign, he touted many proposals, from cracking down on immigration to expanding tariffs. What policy do you think will have the biggest effect, good or bad, on Central Ohio?
Well, I, for one, am really worried about the tariffs, and I'm also worried about the immigration crackdown. Foreign producers and businesses and governments don't pay tariffs. We do. So prices will increase, making goods less affordable than they are now. That won't necessarily increase the inflation rate as it's defined. There will be a spike up and a higher sustained level. You're talking about things like Canadian lumber, so think construction, energy, Chinese clothing and appliances, Mexican and South American produce, and much, much more. All those things will be more expensive and less affordable for households. The other point is that when we put a tariff on other countries, they put a tariff on us. The last time that happened, it hit Central or Ohio's agribusiness industry very hard, and it would do so again. As far as immigrants are concerned, we need them desperately to fill our jobs and our workforce. Here's something I hadn't seen before. Between 2010 and 2023, the number of foreign-born residents of the Columbus metro area increased 85,000. That's 31% of our total population increase over that period. Foreign-born individuals in our labor force increased 65,500. That's 53% of our total labor force increase. So you take away immigrants, and we are in a world of hurt. And like it or not, undocumented immigrants are working in lots of jobs in farming, restaurants, construction, and much more that desperately need to be filled. Georgia enacted a strict immigration enforcement law in 2011. The resulting labor shortages caused around $140 million in agricultural losses. The shortages also affected hotels and restaurants. Those losses caused indirect impacts throughout the economy. That's why I'm worried.
We have incorporated some assumptions on tariffs and immigration. And what we did was look at what happened under President Trump's first term. And there, it was mostly targeted to Chinese goods. There was some for aluminum and steel, and it certainly impacted the agricultural economy. But overall, the impact on prices and inflation was quite modest. Given that, we've increased our inflation forecast just 0.3 of a percentage point than what it otherwise would be. So we thought absent tariffs, inflation would continue to cool to about 2.1%. We've now pushed it up to 2.4%. And we've taken about the same amount away from economic growth overall, so reduced our forecast by 0.3. So quite modest. That said, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know if it's going to be exactly a replay of Trump 1, or it will be something less or something more. And depending which products and which countries are affected, it will have a greater impact, not just on Ohio, but the national economy. So I think time will tell, and we'll have to reassess and continue to reforecast. I think that's one of the things I would say is forecast early and often for this year. But for now, there's a lot of tailwinds with the economy, and I think that's the positive takeaway at this point. I would also point out there was a Washington Post article yesterday, which I thought was quite credible, where they named aides to the incoming Trump administration talking about having universal tariffs, but they would be limited to certain products or sectors. So it's not as if they, for instance, it's been floated, we'll have 25% tariffs against Mexico and Canada. According to the Washington Post article, that's not really the tact or the angle that they would take. All of that could change on a dime, as we know. But I think that would be more hopeful, and perhaps if they target the wholesale level, it's not clear how much of that gets passed on to the consumer. So just some of it does. I agree with Bill. It is ultimately still a tax on businesses or consumers. But it depends on how it's orchestrated. So I think we have to withhold judgment a little bit and not get overly, negative and say, let's see what plays out. And on the immigration front, I would just add that we have been seeing immigration flows slow down for the past 6 months. So we already have some of that happening. Remains to be seen, again, what is actually implemented and put in place. And hopefully it's a more practical stance that is adopted. Again, that's our baseline forecast. We'll see what the next coming months bring us.
Yeah, I think continuing on Kathy's point, one kind of meta issue I want to highlight is just that I do think we're moving into this space where our president and his administration are much less measured in their communications, and we're going to see a lot more posturing and negotiations, right? We all heard about the press conference yesterday in the Gulf of America and Greenland. And so I think having to put that in context is useful, but also recognizing that that has the potential to create a lot of excess volatility in markets, right? We'll see that initially in financial markets, but we'll also see that in labor markets where firms may be reluctant to hire regular full-time employees, turn to temporary employees, turn to gig workers instead to make sure that they can be lean in response to whatever the administration may be doing, right? They may also be less inclined to make big investments in new technologies or new spaces, again, so that they have that mobility and liquidity to respond to this ever-evolving policy environment.
Thank you. One of the biggest concerns I hear by both businesses and government officials is the lack of affordable housing options or housing options in general in Central Ohio. This isn't unique to our area. It's a national issue. Central Ohio is still relatively affordable compared to coastal cities. So how much of this is a drain on our economy, and what could be done to alleviate it?
Well, it is a real problem. I talked about that in this program last year. We've been building fewer housing units than our household growth now for the past 20 years. That's driven our vacancy rates to unsustainably low levels, and it's limited housing availability and choice. Although we are still cheaper than the coasts, our housing costs and rents have been rising faster than average. We're building now about 11,000 houses and apartment units per year, doing a whole lot better than we were. We need, though, to be building at least 16,000 a year, possibly as many as 20. So yes, it's a problem, and it limits the ability of people to move here.
You know, I would echo Bill's comments, and you do see that across the country. You know, I go back to like the great financial crisis, and when, you know, we had the implosion of the housing boom, right? The pendulum swung wildly the other way, but then housing was on fire, lots of speculation. Housing starts with 2.2 million. And now we're looking at like half that amount, roughly, that we have. So the pendulum swung the other way. There was a lot of caution about overbuilding, oversupply. And as Bill pointed out, we've seen housing stock or supply greatly lag demand. That's even one, you know, initially in the recovery after the great financial crisis, a lot of young people were living home or moving back home. But now those young people are going out and they want to at least rent if they can't afford. And they're building households, and now the supply is not there. And that's why we're seeing a tremendous run up in home prices and rents. On a national level, home prices are up since pre-COVID over 50%. That's incredible, right? In such a short period of time, that's happened. And rental inflation has been one of the big bugaboos for the Federal Reserve and trying to get inflation back down to 2%. You know, all very related. So I think the answer is supply, because we don't want people to retard and not create households, right? We want the young people to go out and be able to start their own household. So we need to see supply. A lot of that comes down to local zoning laws and rules. I know in New York City, where I reside, they've just rolled out this initiative to build 80,000 new apartments or condos, co-ops, and they're doing it. And you know, there was some resistance, but they went into areas that were less dense in the city, which probably hard for some of you who've visited Manhattan. It seems very dense. It is, but there are areas like where I live is more low density, and they're saying, hey, we could build dwellings above these, you know, restaurants and other places, stores, and 80,000 could go. Now it's going to take many years to do that, but it's just a start. And I have read other initiatives, but that's really what it takes. And builders also have to be incentivized, I think, somehow, or I'm not saying necessarily at a national level. I think a lot of it's local, but there has been disproportionate amount of building for higher income houses and for meeting that demand, but not for the low or middle class, and that's really where we need that. And until then, there's going to continue to be a friction with prices going up, and or just not the ability for people, as you say, certain locales like Columbus, which are booming and growing. It restricts the growth overall of the economy.
Yeah, I think, coming back to what Bill mentioned about skill mismatch, I suspect that some of that is also related to some geographic mismatch, right, of where folks are able to afford to live and where the jobs are. And so this is part of the broader housing problem that we're thinking about. The other piece, though, of the housing problem is not just the availability of housing, but the security of housing, right? We look at the very high proportion of folks that are housing cost burdened in our economy, right? And we look at the excess volatility that we're seeing in markets, this greater reliance on temporary workers, on gig workers, the disappearing of sort of stable, steady, 40-hour full-time regular jobs creates more housing insecurity, which reduces that attachment to the labor market, and I think feeds into a lot of these concerns as well. I'm optimistic. I think Columbus, again, has taken a lot of really great steps. I think we're actually in a position to show the country what an effective and equitable housing policy looks like, right, for a new growing city. And I'm afraid that if we don't take those steps at this point, we're soon going to end up facing a lot of problems that are facing bigger cities like Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland, right? So I'm really optimistic about, again, and excited about public-private partnerships that are leveraging sort of public financing, but also facilitating community stewardship of land and homes.
It's a lot better to be thinking about this problem than not thinking about this problem.
Thank you. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. Doug's holding it up. If you're watching online, please type your question into the chat. But before we take audience questions, I have one more question for the panel. One of the biggest things talked about on a national economy is artificial intelligence and the need for data centers to power all that. How do you foresee this technology and those data centers affecting our lives and especially the Central Ohio economy in 25?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So I think AI appears to hold great promise. And when I talked about productivity gains earlier, that would feed potentially directly into that, right? If we can, as workers, become even more productive in our daily activities and output, that benefits all of us. It adds to GDP growth, it adds to corporate profits, and it also feeds into higher wage growth for all of us. And that's really very beneficial. Surveys and data have seen, particularly from the Federal Reserve banks who have published on this, it is being adopted, but there's a long way to go. So the way to look at it is we're still probably in the very early stages of the AI adoption. The New York Fed survey showed only like 5% of the companies that they surveyed actually adopted it. And if you think about that, now I know nationwide we're very big and very quick adopters of AI, very big believers in the potential. But if you think about like medium-sized or smaller-sized firms, it just takes longer for any technological progress or new technology to be adopted by them and implemented. So that holds great promise, but it probably takes a while before we see the full benefits and fruit of that. I think in terms of the data center, that's another question. I think it's something we have to manage. Not a real expert on that per se, but when I see the numbers and, on one hand, it adds to economic growth and infrastructure building, that itself is good. But it has to be managed, right? And if we run out of, enough energy to power that, and, do we turn to nuclear more, and how does that manage? So I do think that's maybe the biggest question at this point.
Back to AI. I've been Bummer Bill for the last hour. let me give you one bit of encouragement. The experts are all saying that there won't be the wholesale AI-related job loss that a lot of people are fearing. It's going to be more like profound changes in the way all of us work. There's a great quote from an IBM study that said, AI won't replace people, but people who use AI will replace people who don't. So we all have to prepare, employers and employees, for this new and very exciting world.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of potential and upside with AI. I also see some parallels with high-speed broadband that I hope will teach us some lessons, right? So initially, we let high-speed broadband just expand sort of as the private market deemed, right? And folks who had early access, companies and individuals benefited a lot from that, right? And we're just now, 20 years later, beginning to democratize access to high-speed broadband. So that I hope we don't make those same kinds of, we don't take a back seat with AI like we did with high-speed broadband. We need to be proactive in ensuring that everybody is able to utilize the technology, has access to it, has training, and also that we manage the way that it's integrated into our workplaces and our work styles so as to benefit everybody, right, in the economy and not just the very top of our income distribution.
Well, thank you. And thank you, panelists. And now Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. For those of you here in person, please join Doug over at the microphone. Doug, what is our first question?
Ben, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. If you have a question and you can make it through this crowded room, please do join us over here. I can't come to you because the camera that we have for the live stream audience is right in front of us here. So, but please do make your way over here. If you are watching online, please type your question into the chat. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common, don't they? They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and what punctuation mark does a question end in?
A question mark.
Good job, Bill. Thank you. Here's our first question to the panelists. Michael Wilkos, watching on the live stream audience, asks, what are one or two strategies you would recommend Central Ohio implement to narrow that skills gap between those seeking employment and our region's unfilled jobs?
Well, I really think it's a question of figuring out what the needs for the occupations in our key industries, our key growing industries are, target those needs, and make sure that we're teaching them in our schools, we're teaching them in our training sessions, we're broadcasting them throughout the economy. What do workers need to know? That's probably the single biggest thing that we ought to be doing. We're doing some of that. We need to be doing more.
I think more intentional partnerships between educational institutions and employers in the private sector would be great. So, as an educator myself, I'd love to chat with any of you all who see pathways for us to provide more relevant curriculum, more relevant training opportunities, internships, and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much, panelists. I'm Bill Wayhoff with Steptoe & Johnson, a law firm here in town, and I'm just curious. It seems like Columbus State and Ohio State have a good handle on the development that's going on in our region, matching up skills with training and what have you. But I wondered if anyone has done, not to be critical, but to be helpful, a study of the downtown Columbus High School, as well as our Fort Hays High School, which are both vocational, as to how their programs are matching up with the needs of the community. And then to the extent that they're not, we're a very wealthy community. We should be giving support to those schools so that they can offer whatever programs are necessary to prepare our young people. because we have a lot of great young people. And the question is, are any of you aware of such a study being done?
I'm not, but it certainly could be. I've done a lot of work along those lines for the regional campuses of Ohio University, for example, scattered throughout Appalachian Ohio, and also for the Central Ohio Technical College, that very sort of work. And I could do it.
Bill's going to save us. F4 Marketing LLC asks, do you have thoughts on the ever-expanding national debt? And is there anything individuals should do in response?
So the debt continues to rise at a ferocious rate, I would say. Now, in addition to the other liabilities and expenditures we have as a country, we're also seeing interest costs payments increase. And that's because, one, the debt level keeps rising, but two, because interest rates are so much higher, right? Just this week, the government, the U.S. Treasury is issuing bonds and notes to roll over debt. And the interest rates are very high, and certainly higher than what we saw, going back 5 years ago. In terms of, reining that in, at individual level, it's very tough, right? It has to be communicated to our congressional leaders, and it has to go through the political sphere for that to really take hold, because if there are any changes, it has to typically go through Congress. We'll hear more about it, but there's other ways with a reconciliation bill where it's still Congress is involved, but they can get by the senatorial filibuster, right? And be able to get just a majority of votes in the Senate as opposed to 60. So we're going to hear a lot about that in the coming months. And I think things like immigration tariffs are going to be tied up into that, to be honest. But, looking at the spending, there's been, my observation over the last 20 years, there's been increased scrutiny and restriction of discretionary spending. And that's things like education, highway authority spending, things like that. But when you look at the entitlement spending, right, that's Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, that's really the bulk of our liabilities and spending that's going to come forward. And it's happening now, and it's going to happen for the next, foreseeable future. That's the golden rail of politics, though, of course, right, is, politicians don't really like to bring that up. And when they do, it causes an uproar, of course, understandable. But having some kind of action, whether it's several little mini steps, doing something, because that's really what makes it so unsustainable, frankly. Because we could continue to squeeze education, and defense won't get squeezed, certainly not the way the world is today. But there's so much, you can only get so much out of that. And that's going to be the question. I was hoping we would take some, bites at that apple, and then eventually when we have to make a big transition, it'll make it easier, but that has not happened. So the one silver lining is the rest of the world continues to fund our debt, right? Like, even though interest rates are high right now, we're still relatively low, and the dollar is still relatively strong. So the politicians have no urgency. If we started to see the financial markets act up a lot, that's when maybe they would take this more seriously.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ryan Schick. I'm a small business attorney for Activate Law here. This question may surprise Bill. Have peer cities seen success in supporting small businesses through education and resource access, and what can we learn from them?
I haven't really looked at peer cities that much. There are certainly a lot of resources and organizations here. The problem is not so much what we don't have, it's that we don't talk about it. The Small Business Development Center at Columbus State was my first stop when I was thinking about starting this business 14 years ago. I just went in and asked them, if I do this, am I going to starve? I haven't starved. Yeah, the Columbus Library, the Small Business Administration, peer support networks, so forth, they're all here. We just need to talk about them a little bit more, and we need to help people overcome the fear factor. That's the biggest thing that we need to do. If I do this, will I starve?
Something I'm curious about is that even though some interest rates have declined, some mortgage rates are going up. Why is that?
So you're correct. The Federal Reserve lowered short-term interest rates 1 full percentage point last year, and yet the 10-year Treasury yield went up about that same amount. Typically, when the Federal Reserve is lowering short-term rates, that filters through all the way up to 10-year and eventually mortgage rates, and all rates decline. This time is different. Part of the reason, and I should say the reason I'm mentioning 10-year Treasury yields, because that's the bellwether in the bond market, and mortgage rates tend to be dictated by movements in 10-year yields. There's some spread. So right now, mortgage rates hovering close to 7% again, where the 10-year Treasury yield has increased to 4.7%. So it will track movements in the 10-year Treasury yield. Reasons for that: one, there's been in the bond market, the expectations of how much Fed rate cuts would happen in 2025 have been pared back dramatically. Right now, the bond market thinks the Fed may cut rates just once, so that's 1/4 percentage point. And they don't even see 2 full rate cuts priced in. If you look back in September, it was about, if I recall correctly, 1 full percentage point of rate cuts by the Fed. So when that happens, even though in reality the Fed's lowering rates, it's the expectation drove 10-year yields higher as you go out in duration. So that's the main reason. The other reason is there's concerns about inflation. We talked about that. The inflation's been a little stickier the last few months, and if we do get tariffs, that could boost goods prices more. And then there's concerns about the deficit, the question just about that. The deficit is always an issue, the debt, but every once in a while the bond market really makes it an issue, and then yields go a little higher. So in a nutshell, that's what's happening. And mortgage rates really can't come down materially until we see 10-year Treasury yields decline. And unfortunately, that has not happened. And when we do see it decline a little bit, you see a little bit of movement in the existing housing market. We did see inventory of homes for sale increase, and that helps the supply-demand imbalance. But with mortgage rates at 7%, I'm sure many of you in the room have mortgage rates. If you do have a mortgage, it's closer to a 3% handle, 4%. It's very hard to give that up and say, oh, I'll move to another home, when you know you have to pick up a mortgage at 7%.
Everyone, I wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal. So we'll turn it over to the other Doug Buchanan for closing remarks.
All right. Well, thanks, I guess, Bill. For the 3rd year in a row, I hope you know that everybody in the room is hoping you're wrong, but we appreciate you sharing your insights. Yeah, exactly. All right. We'd like to once again thank our sponsors, Smoot Construction, Frost Brown Todd, the Columbus region, Ian Alexander Photography, and PNC, and our presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, our live stream and marketing partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and View Columbus for hosting us. How about a round for all of them? And a very special appreciation for today's fantastic panelists, Joyce Chen, Kathy Bostjancic, and Bummer Bill LaFayette, and our host, Ben Lanka. How about a round for them? We got another great one next week. It's the new Columbus real estate scene. We'll be back here at View Columbus next Wednesday, so we will see you there. Thank you, everyone. Have a great year and have a great afternoon.